All right, Bigfoot Society. You've got the privilege of talking to Mr. Marc Coppell today. Marc is all the way over there in New Zealand. He is I guess you could say, a paranormal investigator, but also a lot of his research has kind of gone over into the Bigfoot related field as well. So some really interesting things to talk about today. And Marc, welcome to the show. How are you, friend?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty hair-raising experience last night. I almost didn't make it to the interview this morning, so I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Let's talk about that for a minute, because you were just telling me that off air, and literally, I mean, you really should not be here. What you just experienced, it was pretty intense.
Yeah, I went to my typical area where I go in the wild. Now, cell phone doesn't work. You know, in certain parts, it just doesn't work. And so unless you've got a GPS beacon to, signal satellite to get help, you're going to have to rescue yourself. Fortunately, I had a knife on me. I was actually going across a zip line that I made across a creek to go into this, remote. It was kind of like a moat, this creek. So, I set up a zip line to go over about 3-4 months ago. I went there yesterday and I had this weird feeling like I don't feel good about this. But, I was on a time crunch. I was trying to get across there before nightfall, and I made a big mistake. There was too much slack in the rope. Plus, I had a big pack on. So I went onto this rope, and then I got stuck in the middle. And then I was getting pulled downwards because gravity, my pack's really heavy. I was getting pulled downwards, and I couldn't move myself. Now, plus, I've got back issues, which means that my lower back was kind of giving out, and I was almost passing out, and I was hung up there by myself. So the only way I could get free, I had this thought. I had a knife in my vest. I had to pull my knife and try to swing myself into a small tree that was close by. Otherwise, I would have dropped about 20 plus feet. I quickly cut through this rope that was about 2,000 kilogram load strength on it. So I had to cut through, and I fell into this tree, this other tree, fortunately, and so it could have ended up really bad.
Oh my goodness, Marc! Yeah, that is extremely lucky that you were able to get through that really with no injury, it seems.
Yeah, just pretty spooked. That's all. Just realize you got to be really careful out there. Preferably have someone with you.
When you go out in these areas, we may. I know we're gonna have to start foundationally for myself, because I'll say it. Hey, a lot of the people listening are from the U.S. When we think of New Zealand, we're thinking of like Lord of the Rings films. Like, that's what we know about New Zealand. So when you're going out to this area where you almost had this thing happen yesterday, how remote were you?
Well, I mean, it wasn't too far from society, but it wasn't like, being out in the middle of the mountains, it was a remote area, but it wasn't so far, but my cell phone didn't work. So even if I tried to use it, it wouldn't have worked where I was. So I go, this is my research area number 2, which I go to. We've had rocks flying next to me. Sometimes UFOs going over the forest canopy, moving very fast. A lot of weird stuff has happened, recording very strange voices out there. I've been really wanting answers to what I've experienced in the past.
Well, that's really interesting. So it sounds like what I'm picking up is that in New Zealand as well, you have areas of high strangeness, even kind of similar to how we have them in the U.S. and certain areas might come up later on in the interview, especially. But things thrown at you, that sounds familiar. That sounds like something we deal with over here, where researchers or witnesses will be out in certain areas and they'll have rocks thrown at them, usually in Bigfoot related areas. So are you saying that you guys also have Bigfoot over there in New Zealand as well?
Yeah, to my shocking discovery, I spent many years in America. Coming back to New Zealand, weird stuff happened back here. Now, there's a connection to Skinwalker Ranch, which you've probably heard of. Weirdness followed me around. Now, New Zealand, I had no idea growing up here that there was legends from the Maori people who landed here in New Zealand about 800 years ago. They had legends of these hairy giants that were incredibly strong. They were terrified of. There were areas where they would not go, cross creeks. There's certain mountainous areas they would avoid because of, according to some of their legends. Now, they didn't have, the ability to write. They just passed everything on through, carving and song and dance and oral traditions. But many of their the legends that they talked about in their stories were quite reflective of Sasquatch.
Oh wow! I mean, that is so eye-opening for myself. We were fortunate enough to have an interview that was all about Australia a few weeks ago, and that was eye-opening as well. But to hear that similar things are happening in New Zealand is amazing. Is there a name that we should be calling it for New Zealand as opposed to Bigfoot or Sasquatch?
Well, the natives here would call them the Moehus, the Rapawais, the Matuls, the Marols. There's several names, just like, around the world, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of names for these hairy giants found across the globe. I'm really shocked to discover the legends here and the other weird stuff that was going on.
So so Moehos, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So when you get these reports of Moehos in New Zealand, have you found that they tend to be more towards having paranormal aspects along with them, or are they more where it seems like there's like maybe some undiscovered animal out there where people are seeing some kind of primate?
Well, there seems to be a bit of both. I mean, there's a lot of what's considered something physically, biologically here. People see a physical creature, sometimes described with reddish eyes that have very powerful lungs that let out growls, incredibly strong, incredibly intelligent, outperform us in every way, particularly out there in the wild, in these remote areas. The descriptions often fit descriptions of like the Yowies as a Sasquatch or the Armistes. These descriptions fit almost identically descriptions of the other Bigfoots and other places.
Gotcha. I was surprised that, when we heard from Australia, there's multiple different types of Yowies and they look differently. And over here in America, we also have, kind of different types of regional Bigfoot. I think some of them maybe have a more Neanderthal look. Some of them have maybe a more orangutan look. Have you found that over there in New Zealand, in different parts of the country, there are different looks to these Moehos?
Well, I did hear from a man that worked in the Waipua forest in Northland, a very old forest, a man that worked for the Department of Conservation. He was actually on a job with a fellow worker in this, maintaining some sort of track. Now, he described something that was very hairy, but slender, not bulky like the Paddy description, the famous Gimlin footage. This was something slender. Now, they are described as being from about 6 foot tall up to around 12 feet tall. There are various descriptions. However, they seem to be kind of general, about the same, very hairy. I don't quite hear so much about really small ones or dogmen. Well, we only got one report of dogmen here down towards Wellington Way, but yeah, mostly, described as something that's very hairy, reddish to black fur. My feeling is from my experiences myself is that they are a type of people who are acutely aware of us. They're acutely aware of what cameras are, what we do, even our intentions.
Okay, so extremely interesting. When you say they seem to be aware of cameras, that reminds me of how a lot of individuals over here, we will think that they are maybe even aware of like IR in-game cameras. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Yes, definitely. I use infrared cameras quite a bit, particularly at nighttime.
Gotcha. Have there been, so we mentioned, the Patterson-Gimlin footage a minute or so ago. Have there been any successful photographs or videos captured in New Zealand as of yet?
Not so much Bigfoot wise. However, I did put out a documentary. This one took me 10 years to make. Now, towards the end of my documentary, I take somebody into this, what I call research area number one, a very hard to reach area. It's a machete only kind of area where weird stuff had happened. Now, when I was actually taking a series of photos where weird stuff had been happening, and one of my shots up on this very steep, slippery slope, there's something up there that has a conical head, typical Bigfoot shape. And I went back to actually try to debunk it. I actually took my drone there and I flew up the slope. Weeks later, or was it months later, I went back to try to recreate that shot. I couldn't. I actually climbed down the slope very carefully. I have slept out in that area too. But this is why I was getting those footprints. All the weird stuff was going on there, and I was trying to figure out what the heck was going on in the early days. But I suspect that I may have got one in one of my photographs.
Oh, absolutely. There'll be a lot of people listening to this audio only, and I'll have links in the show notes as well. But so the name of your documentary, is it the X-rated files?
Yeah, so X-rated files, follow from Skinwalker. Yeah.
Perfect. Just awesome. Very good. You mentioned that there seems to be an intelligence, and then I think you mentioned as well knowing intention, which those can lead to very interesting conversations over here. Can you think of any times when there's been intelligence shown, or the Moehos have been able to sense what a person's intention is as they go out into the area?
Well, I can't really say that for other people other than my own experiences myself. I'll give you an example. Now, this is actually in the documentary. I did gifting like what some people do. Sometimes I'll gift them fruit and stuff in a certain area. Now, I went back one time. I was absolutely shocked to find a dead wild pig laid right next to where I do gifting, freshly killed, eye still glassy, what appears to be an incision on the hind of its back, bloodless incision, sitting there, freshly killed. It looked like they had gifted me. There's other weird stuff that happened. Like I would complain and say, "Oh, it doesn't look like they were here today. Did something would throw a rock would hit my boot." Or because it's so wet here, it rains all the time. It's very hard to find a dry stick. Sometimes I'll do stupid things like bang a tree with a stick, but it's hard to find a dry stick. Well, one time I said, "Oh, I wish I could find a good stick to bang a tree." I go back there another time, and then there's this this really good dry stick just laid up against a fence, just like deliberately placed there. Stuff like that.
That is always extremely interesting, man. That finding that pig there, that sounds extremely close to a lot of things we deal out here with, like almost cattle mutilations, where there's lack of blood. So that's very strange to hear that in other country as well. Have you ever tried going out to one of your areas and being like, hey, if there's talking directly to the area that you're in, and have you had any responses that way?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And quite shockingly. When I say shocking, going into the area, very hard to get into, very slippery. I sometimes I'll do a call to them, like a whoop kind of call. Well, what happened is they actually whooped back to me. They pull on a tree branch, and then something with a very deep set of lungs, a groan, like a groan response. I wore a GoPro camera plus a separate. In the early days of GoPros, the sound recording was crap.
Right.
Good visuals, the sound. So I had to wear a separate body mic, and I upgraded my mics. But anyway, so whatever it was, pulled back on a branch and groaned. Now, if you listen carefully to the footage, the audio on that, you can hear this groan responding to me. This is where I was finding these footprints, strange structures. I found they also like to mimic. They like to mimic human language, and I recorded it. Now, this has snowballed in recent years. This has snowballed. I'm now recording howling, strange howling that doesn't sound like anything that I can identify. I had a wildlife professional, a park ranger, local park ranger, who listened to that, and he heard something similar in the Coromandel Ranges, on the Coromandel Peninsula, on the North Island, East Coast. Heard this howling. He went there with some workmates to go do curry tree seed harvesting. That means climbing up these very high trees using ropes. Anyway, he said that he heard this howling out there that he couldn't explain, that wasn't like anything you've heard, almost like a siren, but without the sound going down, like going. And I've heard that. I recorded some hours of whatever's going on. I had stones thrown at me along with these strange sounds. One time I heard a didgeridoo. I mean, my camera picked up the sound of a didgeridoo. What the sound of a didgeridoo doing out in the bush in an area where there's no public tracks, in a very wild, dangerous area where I nearly died yesterday, in a very dangerous area to go to, some kind of highly intelligent interaction going on. That is it something coming from another dimension? Whatever's going on is acutely aware of us and our reasons for being out there. Now, they don't like a lot of people. Now, I've recorded a number of messages. I use very powerful. I use mics similar to this. This is one of my mini parabolic mics.
Okay.
Now, what separates me from a lot of researchers is I use high-powered mics, and it's really paid off. I've been able to record very strange messages, something with very big lungs out there. And you can hear some of these samples in some of my videos on my channel.
So so you're almost capturing kind of like EVPs on the paranormal side. Is that kind of what you're referring to when you're capturing language?
Both.
Oh,
I'm getting both.
Wow.
I'm getting stuff. I'm hearing disembodied voices, and also EVP related that your ears don't hear at the time, but get picked up. Now, my mics, the professional mics I use, are shielded from EMF and RF, electromagnetic frequency, and also radio frequency. They're shielded. It ain't picking up radio. It's picking up sometimes they say things that are really strange. One of the messages I picked up out there says humans kill them, and they give themselves a name. Sometimes they'll call my name. something with a very big set of lungs. Some of these voices don't sound like us nor wildlife. It is really shocking stuff, folks. It's and I'm really glad that I'm recording good audio, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't know. At least when you record something, you can go over it and perhaps see if you can debunk it for something. Was it a hiker, or was it something that was explainable? But many times the stuff that I record, just you can't explain it, not in prosaic terms.
Wow, that's very shocking. When you hear your name called, so are you hearing this with your own ears in real time, or is it's recorded and you hear it later?
Both. Oh, sometimes man. I'll actually hear. I'll have a hard time understanding what they're saying, but my mics will pick them up, what they're saying. And it's really shocking when it's your own name. And sometimes they say things that are not permitted on broadcast. One of the voices said, "We're not going to kill you, Mark. You're coming out. Humans kill Asimo people." Very strange. Some of the voices are kind of bird-like. Some are very like you imagine a Bigfoot speaking. Some of them are very deep voices. Some of them have a quality that is beyond the dynamics of human speech. Very powerful. They can echo. The voices can echo in the mountains. Very, very powerful voices. Elongated. The vocal range is just, to me, is amazing.
Can you? There was the first phrase you said where we're not going to kill you, Mark, and then there was something else, and I didn't quite catch it.
One of the voices I record out that says "you're coming out." So I also do instrumental transcommunication, which separates me from just about everybody that does this kind of thing. At least with Sasquatch research, I use electronics using Faraday radio blocking material around my radios. I have a theory that, and something very strange happened that's connected to what I'm talking about right now. But anyway, I use Faraday radio blocking material to block, radio signals. I don't want radios. I suspect that some of these beings can use our electronics to get messages through. Now, the reason why I say this is, some 2 years after returning from, after going to Skinwalker Ranch, where I had my first Sasquatch encounter back in 2013. In 2015, after traveling halfway across the world, I was doing a paranormal investigation in Auckland City, of all places. I'm using a Sanjian hacked radio with this material around it. A very strange voice comes through it. It says something about accepting the Bigfoot people, big people. And then it repeats. Now, at the time, I couldn't quite understand what it was saying. It's something, and it kept repeating. And it was like nothing you would hear on the radio, completely opposite. Very hard to explain. And what I suspected, I got followed from America all the way to the South Pacific, where this was started happening in the wild. And I was like, now, when stuff happened to me in America, now I've had a very strange life, a number of very strange things. I studied the woo to the boo to the foo. So I study, I've got a 410 style background. So my family got basically chased out of a house by poltergeist phenomena in the 80s. So I have become very interested. I've come across some very scary things in my life. Some entities that can do physical harm. There is stuff. Now, you mentioned EVPs. Yes, there's stuff that can come across from other dimensions. Now, my question is, well, the stuff that seems to be quite physical, does it have the ability to cross dimensions? Is it interdimensional? Does it have the ability to come through like we might describe a ghost? And now the reason why I say this is, when I was going to my area, one of my first areas that I went to when I came back to New Zealand back in 2015, I was walking along this wild track, I was actually looking at an old gold historical area, overgrown, lots of very native bush around there. I heard something walking through the bush bipedal, and I was taking a leak, and I was like, there shouldn't be anybody out here. I hear this walking, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be caught with my zip down. You know, I was like, oh my, you know, well, something walks right up to me. I could not see it. It was right on the edge of this ravine. So I was like, what the, is it a ghost? Is it, I've had many ghost experiences. I've seen all kinds of apparitions, sometimes with other people. Now, I had this strange feeling that I had to go into this ravine, and I didn't want to because I knew it was really dangerous getting in there. It's a machete-only area. So I went down there. That's when I started finding footprints similar to this. Now, this is one of the small casts I have.
Yeah.
So anyway, but some of them were a lot bigger. Now, I noticed we talked about the sound aspect. So I find these footprints. Now, it rains a lot here. There's a lot of deadfall on the topsoil. So to find prints is very hard. So you have to be in the right area. You have to be in like a creek area where there's the mud, the soft ground is exposed. Where I found these footprints, I found the strange X structures where they'll shove two broken sticks into a creek. And it's an area. Now, some people might say, oh, it's got to be kids. It's got to be kids. Well, this area is not only is it hard to get to, there's cutty grass, there's blackberry, there's prickles. You could rip your feet up very easily out there. Who is walking around in an area? Now, Westerners, we have soft feet, But anyway, so I'd find these strange structures, and I'm like, I've got to figure out what that. And it seemed like something would mimic me out there as well, or throw stuff, and that horrible, weird feeling of being watched. Well, when you're in the middle of nowhere, but just getting watched by something. And I needed answers, and I slowly just put pieces of the jigsaw together, and I realized that the Māori talked about these giants that they were deathly afraid of in the wild. They even named some of the areas after them. The Apuki Maorero, which means the hills of the hairy man, a place in the South Island of New Zealand. We talked about New Zealand, the place of the Lord of the Rings. Well, that's fantasy, but however, there's other things that are going on that aren't quite so much fiction. There's something else going on, and includes wildlife professionals, park rangers, people with a serious scientific background. Now, how did they get here? This is one of the questions that people ask me is, okay, you're all the way in the South Pacific. How on earth did they get there? Well, that's a really valid question. Well, now, while I was making this documentary, I went to the Mount Moehau, which is actually one of the locations these giants are supposed to be. I went there to shoot B-roll of this wild mountain. Now, this is my theory. When I was there to shoot, I had my DSLR, I was just doing handheld footage. I got to see a giant silver sphere right by the mountain. I looked, I was like, that's a wild mountain. I mean, that shouldn't be up there. There's nothing manufactured up there. That shouldn't be up there. Is it a reflection? This thing faded right out in front of my eyes. I couldn't get my bloody camera fast enough to get it. It was like one of those situations, like all I can do is talk about it. However, when I did further footage, I picked up these smaller sources, moving like Mark III, very fast. One of them does a mid-air flip. Now, I fly drones too. These weren't drones, moving far too fast. If you blink, you miss them. They're moving that quick. However, I suspect this same mountain is a mountain of what they call the fairy people and the giants, the Patuperehe and the Moehos. Well, I suspect that they were placed here. The theory of panspermia, that just like Westerners, when they first came down here to New Zealand, they brought with them possums from Australia, non-native creatures got over here. I suspect that either something placed them here unnaturally or in some other way. But I suspect that this, we also talked about the Yowie, right, in Australia. Australia's Bigfoot, which is it's about a 2-hour flight across the Tasman Sea to Australia from here. So we're very isolated. So I suspect that they were placed here.
Wow, that's
according to what I saw.
So very interesting. It just opens your eyes. One quick question I wanted to ask before we continue. So there are no primates in New Zealand or any creatures that would even come close to being this at all, right?
We have no bears. We have no monkeys.
Whoa.
There was a report, a cover story, I call it, in 1924. According to Taranaki Daily News, I believe it was in 1952, there was a story about 2 hunters, that same mountain I was just telling you about, where I saw that sphere, that famous mountain. 2 hunters reported seeing a giant on this mountain. And so anyway, there was a cover story saying that, there was a gorilla mascot that escaped a ship off the Bay of Waiaro there, not far away from there, of a escaped gorilla mascot. Now, if you know everything about gorillas, they can't swim. Now, it would be more likely that a baboon could have escaped. Now, also, another thing about gorillas, if we want to talk about, chimps and stuff like that, their feet are not like our feet. Their feet have opposing digits. They're very, very good at climbing. Basically, they have 4 sets of hands. They can climb up trees. Now, the prints that are found here, and there's sometimes other people find prints, giant footprints here. Rex Gilroy, who just recently passed away, cryptozoologist from Australia, author. He also reported coming over here, I think it was in the mid-1990s, found giant footprints, fossilized footprints here in the Koranahapi Gorge area. There have been other people who have come across giant footprints. I've heard from others who found giant footprints here. Their footprints don't look like gorilla footprints. They do not look like chimp footprints. They look like a larger version of ours, except some of them are really large. Now, one of the footprints that I measured was about 37 centimeters. Sorry, I forget what that is in inches offhand. Apologies to those in America. So that over time, there's been reports now, so some people try to basically wash away people's sightings by saying, it was an escaped gorilla. Now, gorillas only live for about 30 to 40 years. So that sighting back in 1952, well, there were sightings way before that and also after that. Now, if you type in Moehau giant sightings or whatever on Google, you will find Press Reader gives a number of samples of sightings of the years all the way up to about 1970s. Hikers, hunters, people, tourists. Now, I got a report, that same mountain that I talked about, where I saw those UFOs, that UFO, and then I caught those other ones straight after. I got reports on that same mountain. There was a man that contacted me, a fireman. He was from Spain. He was here on holiday. He was up this 3,000-foot mountain, 1,000-meter mountain, Mount Moehau. This is a legendary mountain, wild mountain. Some people go up there. They have nothing, but then other people have stuff. He's up there. The summit's actually off limits. But anyway, so the Māori used to carry their dead up there. But anyway, he's there. He's just there by himself. He says he's getting ready to set up his tent to sleep on the summit overnight. He hears the sound of something bipedal footsteps moving in the bush close to him. Now, at first he said he thought it was a wapiti deer, but he said that sounds more bipedal. Then what happens is a series of rocks start getting thrown at him. And this just wasn't pebbles, folks. This was heavy rocks, and I'm talking 14 kilogram. A series of whatever's throwing those rocks should be in the Olympics. According to him, in his report, he said there was a series of rocks that got thrown at him that got closer and closer, and he said that the final one that was thrown at him was about 14 kilograms and was thrown from about 60 feet away or 20 meters away, and landed very close to him. He was terrified. He fled, left his gear, fled the mountain. I was also contacted. I spoke to a man I suspect as a scientist, along with 3 companions who went up that same mountain back in the 70s. They went up there to sleep up there. I don't know exactly what they were doing up there, but they slept about halfway up. They said at about 1 o'clock in the morning, they heard this howl up there that they couldn't explain. They were absolutely terrified. They said they left at pace. Now, I tried to interview them. They didn't want anything to do with it. They had this cognitive dissonance. They didn't want anything anymore to do with it. All they knew is they tried to identify it, that with their analytical minds, they couldn't explain it.
Oh, my goodness.
So, anyway, yeah. So there's a lot of stories like that. My estimation in our current age right now, I've heard from dozens of people with sightings who will contact me through Facebook. There's my estimation, there must be hundreds, if not more, people who've had experiences out in the world here that, because of the ridicule factor, they don't want to talk about their sighting. They're all made fun of. Now, the reason why the ridicule factor, there's a guy here called Lee Hart. He's a comedian. He did his own show. He went to America and made fun of people at a Bigfoot convention. So that's the kind of pub kind of humor that they have here. You know, they really make fun of people. Now, I had a woman, 3 girls, actually not far from where I go, who went down to a tree house out in the bush at the back of this property up in the Waitaki Ranges. This was about 2007. They go down to this tree house, going out, girls about 10 years, about 3 of them. Well, they encountered this thing down there that was about 6 feet high, completely hairy, red eyes, growled at them. One of them was freaked out. I don't know why. She picks up a piece of wood, throws it at it, and this thing growls and starts making its way towards them. I have no doubt that if this being wanted to take them, it could have easily taken them, let alone an adult. So there's a lot of stories like that here in this country, but you will not hear about them in modern media, except for me, stupid me. I painted a big target on myself in this country because, well, I don't care really much. But anyway, I do have some articles in New Zealand Herald, Radio New Zealand. I do have some articles done about my research here, and also this documentary.
Really, what it sounds like is, if people are wanting to hear more of these encounters, the best resource is what you're putting out. I mean, like your YouTube channel or documentary, and you said some articles as well, right?
Yes, yeah. You're looking at pre-70s, around 1970s earlier. There are some accounts that you can read through pressreader.com, I think it is. Just type in Moehau. It's fascinating. I mean, the real question is, how did they get here? I mean, the Australia, the Sasquatch in North America, on the South Pacific, we are one of the most isolated countries in the world, island country.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness, it's so many questions that you could go into so many rabbit holes from there. But I would really want to make sure that we are able to talk about. So, how was it? What did you do over at Skinwalker Ranch? And more importantly, like you had a Bigfoot encounter over there. There's not many documented Bigfoot encounters at Skinwalker. I believe there's one in a book from a long time ago, and there's like a portal involved. But I would love to hear what you experienced over there.
Well, what led me to there? I had a tic-tac UFO sighting in the desert. I nearly crashed my car. I had this feeling to pull over on the highway outside Nelson, Nevada. I had a sighting there, a daytime sighting of this craft. From that day forward in early January 2013, it turned my world upside down. I needed answers, and I'm just very quickly passing through. I learned about Skinwalker Ranch and George Knapp and the NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science study. Robert Bigelow had paid a lot of his own money using a team of highly educated scientists across the spectrum to study what was going on, the cattle mutilations, things that looked like Bigfoot. It wasn't stuff that just happened on the property, but also outside. Now, I went there just to figure out, well, why did I see this Tic Tac UFO thing? I thought, well, that is a legendary. I went there. You have to be invited on the property. It's guarded 24/7. That thing is like the Area 51 of the paranormal. I mean, portals have been seen opening up. Even a couple of scientists saw this yellowish hole open up on the field at night. One of them had night vision gear. You're probably familiar with the story. Mm-hmm. One of them is up on the ridge line watching with his night vision. He can see this huge creature comes through this hole into this field. There's all kinds of weird stuff that took place there. Now, I knew I had to go there for answers because that was, one of the most haunted places in America. And it wasn't just there; it was also Fort Duchesne. I talked to some of the locals there when I went there. I interviewed Larry Sespooch, Ute tribal leader, a spiritual leader there, where they saw weird stuff. Sometimes giant footprints in the area. Anyway, so I went there. The first night I went to Southern Vantage, which is about a mile or so south of the property. I had at nighttime, I had all my cameras set up. The wind was so strong, it was shaking the car. And so I was outside in it. I had these strange lights that approached me, amber-colored lights that would do a 90-degree turn in front of my face, lighting up my face, came really close. They went against the gusty wind. Now, insects can't handle that kind of wind. So anyway, I was like, there can't be fireflies because, they went right against it. So the second night, I went up to this famous location where locals sometimes go it's called UFO Hill. Now, it overlooks the skies above Skinwalker Ridge. You can't see the ranch directly. However, you can see the skies above the property over there. I went up there for UFOs. Let's just face it. I went there for UFOs. Skinwalker Ranch is one of those places that you go there, you can plan for something, but something else can happen. You may not have an experience. But I was one of those people, because of my background and my experiences, I wondered if I was going to be like a magnet for this stuff. So anyway, I went up with my girlfriend up on UFO Hill there, sat in pitch black darkness up on this hill, a rocky hill overlooking the area there. And I had my laptop, had all my cameras set up. I went there to record UFOs. So we heard this strange creature sound there. I don't know what the heck it was. It got recorded on my audio. Then there was a sound of what sounded like an explosion. I thought it was my battery pack on one of my devices that had blown up. I was checking my gear. It was really loud. It was like a little bomb going off. So I was looking. I couldn't figure out what it was because all my gear seemed to work. Now, going back over that footage, a while after, I realized it was an explosion. It was a rock. Something threw a rock right next to us. Now, it was pitch black out there. Now, what happened when we were there, we had a tribal police officer pulled up because my car was parked further down towards the road there. A tribal police officer pulls his car up and checks out, starts taking a picture of my car. And, I had to be really careful because I don't want to spook him. So I said, hello. He couldn't see me because people, trigger happy, But anyway, so this tribal police officer was there. I said, look, what are you doing out here? And, we're sky watching. I just said, we're sky watching, binocular sky watching. Anyway, so he says, just be careful out here. There's real weird stuff that goes on out here. And I should have asked him. Well, tell me more. I should have. But anyway, I felt like we're pushing our luck in this area anyway. So that was the start. Now, I didn't have a proactive interest in the subject of Sasquatch at that time. It wasn't until I 2 years later, I returned to my home country after some 20 years living in America, going back to New Zealand, going to the world. I suspect that I was followed across the world. All this weird stuff started happening. I nearly died. I had this shadow creature thing came right up to me when I should have died. I had two medication interaction that should have killed me. The shadow thing came right up to me, thrust something in my heart, which the ambulance people were surprised is still alive. I had a lot of weird stuff happen. So anyway, it snowballed into all these weird messages I'm recording. When people listen to it, they have no frame of reference. I get a deer in the headlight look. That's what I get. Now, a lot of stuff has happened, and I suspect that George Knapp has talked about the piggyback effect, or the stalker, or the piggyback effect of people who visit areas. Is quite known amongst paranormal investigators that you can be followed from an area. So I suspect also with Sasquatch, we're talking about Sasquatch, that they get to know you. They get to know you, especially if you keep returning to an area. You can build a relationship with them. And I don't have to go too far. They'll interact with me. Now in the documentary, actually, I've had stones thrown me across the world. When I say, in America and also here in New Zealand.
Right.
So pick them up on camera. So I go frame by frame. You can see. Now I tried to replicate that throw. I went down to the area during the day. Whatever threw that stone, had a really good throwing arm. It was really accurate. Now, I've taken people with me occasionally. Some people have never had an experience like this before. Something will come up close to us at nighttime and start clacking stones together. This what I would describe stone clacking sounds. One time we had a rock thrown, a big bang right next to us. I had a group of about 6 or so people there sitting in this location, this wild location where I nearly died yesterday. And it will affect other people too. Sometimes you'll hear strange voices as well. So I knew in the early days I had to record. My goal was to record these voices.
Have you ever experienced in these same places? Let me think. Batteries suddenly not working anymore. Anything like that?
Yeah. So that is also associated with the paranormal.
Right.
Like you can go on investigations and all of a sudden, you've checked your battery, everything's charged up, stuff will fail. There's like Skinwalker Ranch. I went there. I flew a drone up there to get some aerial shots. Well, it was a MX400. It was before they had GPS guided drones. Well, this thing, very strangely, I flew it up completely. I was only about 100 or so feet away from me. Completely lost control. Like something blocked the radio signal and it went and crashed. So I've been out there and I've had battery packs drained, completely drained. So are they the ghosts of Bigfoot? You could say, areas, are they the ghost of soldiers of back, hauntings and that? Are they ghosts of former inhabitants? You could say, well, are they deceased Bigfoot? Are they astral versions of Bigfoot? I have to, think of a lot of things to try to find answers. Have a theory. Oh,
absolutely. So it's wild that you got into Bigfoot after you went back to New Zealand. That is pretty cool. Do you ever feel like ever wish you could come back here to check out places like the Pacific Northwest for Bigfoot activity? Do you ever have that desire to maybe make another trip over here?
Well, I'd love to. I don't really make money off what I do.
Right.
It's
Gotcha.
anything you lose money when you do this, particularly in this country. Yeah, sure. I love to explore. I'd love to go to different places. at least here I don't have to worry about snakes or bears or coyotes or mountain lions, cougars. You know, what it doesn't have for animals, the geography is very steep, slippery. It makes up for it in that.
Absolutely. You've mentioned a few areas in New Zealand where there's a ton of activity. Are these areas also known for missing people as well? Is that something that you deal with in your country too?
Well, there's an area not too far from where I am where there's been a number of people who've gone completely missing. Never heard of it ever again. A place called Piaha, which actually borders the Tasman Sea. People, surfing spot. People go there. They go on this track higher up towards the wild area. People go missing up there. Never be heard of again. And we just actually was another lady that just went missing. So some people wonder what is their connection. There were stories of for Māori that sometimes the people would be taken. There's even stories of some of these beings being cannibal as well. There's the Patapere, what they call the fairy people that look more like us, but they look different to Māori. Talked about taking people sometimes quickly through the air. Very, very strange stuff. As there's a serial killer operating there that's never been caught, quite possible. But as a researcher going up there, nothing's tried to take me or harm me. Scary experiences, yes. Going up there when you're in your tent and you hear the sound of a tree getting ripped down, that's freaky, Okay. I took a picture of these beings started inviting me out there. It's really, I went down the rabbit hole on the subject. They tore down about a dozen healthy trees. Some of them, the South Pacific palm trees, the Nokau palms, they're resistant to hurricane force winds, these things, very strong. These trees were snapped at 90-degree angles, completely snapped, about a dozen of them. In the smaller, this was where I got the picture of what I believe is the Moehau, one of the New Zealand's Bigfoot. I suspect that they did that. There was no lightning marks, no saw marks in an area that's very hard to get to. Now that area has, when the trees get torn down, you get overgrown. The trees start getting, all the carnage from the trees start getting overtaken by the foliage.
Have you ever checked any of your areas for intense radiation readings or anything like that?
Well, I'd love to have some of that scientific gear, but most of my focus has been on audio / video.
Okay, gotcha.
I have in the early days I've done casting, but I carry a lot of gear on me, including safety gear. If something goes wrong. So yeah, I think that would be interesting to see if that fluctuates, or the EMF levels. I do have a K2 meter that paranormal investigators use, but I tend to try to record the phenomena because it does interact with me. But that would be very interesting to see.
Yeah, I think more researchers over here are starting to look into that as well. Have there ever been any reports that where the witness is, saying something to the effect of, I heard a sound and it seemed to affect me physically, like I had my chest was vibrating, or I started feeling weird. Over here we call it infrasound. I don't know. Is that a thing that comes up over in your area as well?
Yeah, some witnesses describe the sound that they produce goes right through your chest. Very powerful. I've also heard footfalls, like big thuds. It's weird. The power behind it is just weird. Sometimes it's described, was a Dom Eastwood, the park ranger I interviewed. he described going to areas where there'll be like a bubble, like you walk into a bubble where all the wildlife goes completely quiet.
Yep.
Sometimes people describe that, or like what I experienced too, the feeling of being watched, that uneasy, hairs stand up on the back of your neck kind of feeling.
Okay, so you've mentioned something a few times where it's really interesting. So over here, you can't really get any park rangers to talk, especially on record, because they're very scared of losing their jobs. It's something where stuff happens, but they don't want to talk to it. I've talked to one gentleman off record. But are you saying that the park rangers over there, are they willing to be interviewed about what they've experienced? There's not really a, we can't talk about that, like that doesn't exist type thing.
Well, I had this one contact me,
Wow.
Dom Eastwood, and he contacted me. He just sometimes described hearing woodknock up high in the mountains, the stones being thrown when they've got a tarp over them, being thrown horizontally, not something dropping from above, not like seeds or anything coming down, stuff like that. So I was very fortunate that he contacted me because he listened to the howling that I recorded back in, April of 2022, when I had picked up stones being thrown, something very strong, very accurate. So he listened to that and he said, yeah, I've heard the same thing. Not all that far from Mount Moehau, that area where, out in the Korean Peninsula, where there's a lot of legends of these giants.
That area, I believe that was the same area you said that you actually can't go up to the summit because it's like, is it sacred for ancestral reasons or?
Yes, well, they used to, Māori used to carry their dead up this 3,000-foot mountain.
Wow.
And they'd bury them at the top. So that's one reason. It is private property up there. I heard of one man that sneaked up over there, and according to him, said somebody fired shotgun over their head. One of the reports I got. However, that's a very wild mountain up there. Now, according to somebody else, he reckons there's an ancient trig stone up there. This gets into forbidden archaeology. A trig stone used for alignment. According to this man, I think it was Barry Brailsford, I think his name. So anyway, there's something up there like that too. Now, I have been to the foothills there. I have slept overnight in the foothills. It's a very wild area. People sometimes die because they die. If you don't go prepared, you can die from exposure in these places.
My goodness. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, in witness encounters that get reported to you, are people reporting anything? Usually it's referred to as telepathy, or where they start hearing communication inside their heads. Is that something that you have come up in reports over there as well?
Well, not a lot. Not a lot. That's probably one of the least reported that I get. And it might be because a lot of people are terrified when stuff starts happening. The fear aspect. Now, if you're calm and you're not having that fight or flight, the adrenaline flowing through your system, I think, it's your state of mind. If you're calm, that you can have that kind of stuff. But a lot of people that have these encounters, experiences, are terrified. Some people don't want to go back in the bush after that. Now, I had something weird happen after the stuff that was going on, the feelings of being watched, the feelings of being followed, the sounds of being followed, that kind of thing. I heard a muttering sound out there, and I felt like whatever it was two beings talking to each other about me. And I said, look, I wasn't there for two Bigfooting or anything like that originally. I was like, look, I'm not here to harm you. I'm not here to hurt you. Now, something came through. Now, this gets into the woo, so this might be offensive to some people. I was in my house. Something came into my bedroom. I was laying on my bed. I was quite wide awake. Something comes into my bedroom. I could feel the energy come up to me, tapped my head, shook the bed, and gave me a date to go back there. Just basically put this date in my mind. So that was mind speak.
Mm-hmm.
I went there that day. I didn't know what the heck was going to happen. So I'm going back into this area again. Something runs past me through the bush like an elephant, smashing through the bush, like charging through next to me. I didn't get a visual, but it was pretty freaky.
It is incredible how many similarities there are now. And this might be old information to some listeners, but I mean, you've got North America, New Zealand, and Australia, different in some ways, but there's some similarities in what you guys are experiencing and what we are experiencing and what they are over in Australia. And I know there's the Almasty in Russia as well, and the Yeren in China. And it's just very, very interesting how there's so many similarities in this phenomenon all over the world. And hopefully someday we will get answers. But Marc, it has been just a fascinating conversation. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today and for answering all my questions about, what you've got going on over there in New Zealand, which I had no idea about. Do you mind spending a bit of time talking about how people can, watch the documentary that you've been telling us about, and also how they can keep up to date with your research if you have a YouTube channel or anything like that?
Well, they can see it all on Mountain of Entities. Just type it into YouTube, search, look me up that way. Documentary took 10 years to make. The X-rated files followed from Skinwalker. Actually, I think it's titled Bigfoot UFO documentary. It got released in late 2023. However, the following year, I did end up putting it up on YouTube for people to see. So watch all the way through the end, folks, because you will hear those very strange voices out there. I take someone with me towards the end of the documentary. There's a radio show that I go in and where they ask some questions, good questions. I take somebody with me who's never experienced this stuff out there, who's familiar with the folklore. And you can see what happens when I take somebody with we find footprints. There's other stuff that goes on. So it gets documented on video and on audio, along with this, which I believe is possibly one of the Moehau's, the New Zealand's Bigfoots.
Fascinating.
It's all on there.
Marc, I'm sure there'll be some people from New Zealand listening to this. If there are, and they do have experiences they'd like to report to you, is there a way that they can reach out to you to share what they've encountered in New Zealand as well?
Well, they can either get hold of me through Facebook, just look me up. There's very few people with my name. Or they could just go through my YouTube channel. I read the comments, and quite often I respond. I just had a man earlier this year down Mary. Him and his wife saw a Bigfoot on a forestry road driving to Napier when they pulled over. They can just contact me through Facebook or through my YouTube channel, the best ways.
Fantastic. Well, Marc Coppell, thank you so much for coming on again, and definitely keep us in the loop if things continue to happen down there in New Zealand. We would love to hear about it sometime in the future, and I'm sure we'll definitely all be following along with things you continue to put out. But thanks so much, Marc. I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Jeremiah. Much appreciated.